There's nothing new about the measurement of air consumption or oxygen consumption during exercise. In fact, in 1889 even, there were discussions of the increase in air consumption by people running or walking as opposed to sitting or lying. August Crowe in 1920 received the Nobel Prize for Medicine for his work on measurement of oxygen consumption. Of course, it's used in space, and athletes are very used to it indeed. In just a few words then, let's talk about exercise physiology and the information that we might be able to obtain from a cardiopulmonary exercise test. Exercise is not just an extension of the body at rest. It has been aptly described by Sir Joseph Barcroft in 1934, when he said the condition of exercise is not a mere variant of rest. It is the essence of the machine. In fact, exercise can increase cardiac output 8 times or more, respiratory volumes 30 plus times, and muscle blood flow 50 plus times. So in fact, we're very much built as an organism for exercise, not rest. Well, we need to define a few terms we're going to use. It's used here and elsewhere. VO2 is the oxygen uptake in mil per minute. If it's mil per minute, there should be a dot over the V indicating its uptake per minute. VCO2 is carbon dioxide, the same. VE, the volume of gas in litres per minute. Again, there should be a dot over the V if it's for a minute. VT is the volume of gas expired in a single breath. End-tidal oxygen is recorded in millimeters of mercury pressure, so more correctly should be PeTO2. End-tidal CO2 has the same unit. VeVO2 is called the ventilator equivalent for oxygen and is the ratio of the minute volume to the oxygen uptake. VCO2 is the same but for carbon dioxide. OER is the oxygen extraction ratio, which is the difference between the oxygen supplied and the oxygen utilized. It's generally referring to muscle. Whatever the function of a cell in your body, it will depend on the availability of adenosine triphosphate, ATP, as an energy source to perform that function. If that cell is a muscle fiber involved in exercise, such as getting up from a chair, walking, running, ATP will need to be constantly generated. Not all exercise utilizes aerobic metabolism. For example, lifting a heavy weight is actually an anaerobic process. However, anaerobic metabolism will then be required to replenish the ATP stores. In muscle fibers, ATP may be generated aerobically via the mitochondria or anaerobically in the cytosol. Exercise physiology explains the mechanisms that produce this formation of ATP. This diagram, made famous by the late Professor Kalman Wasserman, shows the flows necessary whereby oxygen uptake in the lungs allows for oxygen uptake in the muscle fibers. So we'll breathe in oxygen here, and that passes into the lungs, through the pulmonary circulation, through into the heart, through into the peripheral circulation, through to the muscles, and diffuses into the mitochondria. Any set oxygen consumption does not always require the same cardiac output. The controlling factor is the oxygen extraction ratio. For example, during exercise, the OER can rise to 80%, but this is not seen in the surgical patient, where OER exceeding 35% is unusual. In other words, quite a different cardiac output is necessary for a similar oxygen consumption. Oxygen delivery to the tissues is defined as the cardiac output times the oxygen carrying capacity. The oxygen carrying capacity of blood is dependent upon the hemoglobin concentration, its saturation, and dissolved oxygen content. This comes out to be about 200 ml per litre, assuming a hemoglobin of 15 grams per litre. Abnormal hemoglobin, such as carboxyhemoglobin or glycated hemoglobin, that's the HbA1c you hear about in diabetes, will adversely affect this. Blood then flows through the heart, pulmonary circulation, out to the peripheral circulation. Clearly, such issues then as intracardiac shunts or peripheral vascular disease will adversely affect that delivery. A right to left intracardiac shunt is a major problem, for deoxygenated blood from the right side of the heart, coming back from the body, is shunted into the left side of the heart before it's reoxygenated, resulting in a lowering of overall saturation. From the muscular microvascular network, oxygen diffuses across the capillaries to the cells and finally into the mitochondria. The amount of oxygen available is determined by the hemoglobin dissociation curve, which we can discuss perhaps in another tutorial. With continuous training, the capillary density to exercising muscle and the mitochondrial density both increase, allowing for greater oxygen utilization. Within the mitochondria, oxygen is essential for the Krebs cycle, which allows generation of ATP from ADP. In the cytosol itself, the Embden-Meyerhof pathway is the principal source of ATP. Anaerobic metabolism, i.e. ATP production without oxygen, occurs when phosphates from such intermediates as creatine phosphate is transferred from ADP to form ATP. This occurs within the cytosol. There is an increased production of carbon dioxide with anaerobic metabolism. This is important, so remember that. A lot of changes associated with exercise may be accurately measured by a cardiopulmonary exercise test. This is performed by a machine that is able to measure accurately in milliseconds oxygen consumption, carbon dioxide production, inspiratory volumes, and work rate being performed. The heart rate may be obtained from an ECG and incorporated into the machine, and the result is displayed on a computer screen. It's important that the machine can measure changes in milliseconds, otherwise it would be unable to measure changes breath by breath. In this instance, the object is shown performing work via a bicycle ergometer. A treadmill is also commonly used. The results are normally presented as a graph with 9 panels, normally referred to as a 9-panel plot. It looks overwhelming, and the position of the graph on the various panels is not always the same. This is the format of Professor Brian Whip, for which I'm grateful. However, there are others designed by Professor Carmen Wasserman. Let's just look at a few of these and explain what they show, shall we? Clearly, at this point, there is a change in CO2 production in that the CO production on this axis is rising. Now, that's important. We know that when anaerobic metabolism is involved, there is a rise in CO2. This then represents the point during exercise when anaerobic metabolism is needed to supplement, not replace, supplement aerobic metabolism in order to maintain ATP. This we term the anaerobic threshold. The anaerobic threshold is of importance as one is able to exercise for a considerable period of time if your oxygen consumption is below it. Once you've exceeded the anaerobic threshold, your time for exercise is very limited. This graph shows the distribution of the AT of 1,000 people in the general circulation from our own laboratory. You can see the majority of the people have an anaerobic threshold around here. There are a few down here and a few above there. Important, the range is huge. Remember, the majority are there. Why does this matter? Well, with my thanks to Dr. Robert Smith, let's look at the average person we said is about here. Well, if you're down here with 5, you're housebound, you can't do anything. You virtually can just do nothing but sit in a chair all day. Even if you're 8 or up to 11 even, you have very limited exercise. An amateur athlete is about what? Double what you are watching this video. A top amateur is up around 50, but even that isn't as high as the threshold for Olympic qualifying. So in fact, your anaerobic threshold virtually dictates your life. Now, walking and running have a complex relationship. And this is a diagrammatic explanation of that. Note that at relatively low speeds, that's down here, a low speed, walking requires a lower VO2 than running. Running has a VO2 up there, walking down here. So it's more economical to walk at a slow speed than run. But you get to a certain point when it's now much more economical to run than to walk. These aren't shown as points because this is a diagrammatic representation of the issue. So many different figures are quoted by different authorities, it would be impossible to draw a diagram that is accurate. The oxygen pulse, said by many to be one of the most critical measurements one can make, is the product of the stroke volume and the oxygen extraction. And this is the normal VO2 heart rate slope. It is of great value as it represents the stroke volume obtained non-invasively. The slope will only have a lower value in disease, but also the slope will be diminished. Both myocardial ischemia, pulmonary hypertension will produce an abnormal oxygen pulse slope, as does old age. Notice here there's a gradual, with the exercise time, there's a slow increase in the slope, and it comes up to quite a high figure, 15. If now we look at a patient with pulmonary hypertension, we note that it starts to come up at the beginning of exercise, but then it fails and it just forms a plateau with virtually no higher than 5. If we look at the 3 left panels of the WIP plot, that's slides 1, 4, and 7, you'll notice that the anaerobic threshold may be confirmed as the x-axis in all 3 is the same, VO2, VO2, VO2. Not only is it the same, but it has exactly the same points. Then normally you would confirm the anaerobic threshold in panel 1. Then panel 4, we should be able to confirm that by, I'll explain in just a minute, but the points there and by the points here. So if we now look at slide 4 enlarged, you can see that at the AT, the end-tidal oxygen's come down, plateaued, and now started to rise. There. So this means that we should be able to confirm that our anaerobic threshold we measured there is there. And we should be here because the end-tidal oxygen will also rise. Plateau, rise. This graph shows the normal VT and minute volume relationship. Normally, as you increase your minute volume, your tidal volume increases. If that happens, then it means that your rate of breathing does not have to increase as much as if the tidal volume remained the same. So if you have problems with your tidal volume, then you do not have a shape like that for your relationship between tidal volume and minute volume. Here you can see a patient with obstructive pulmonary disease where the tidal volume goes up, but it can't go up any higher. And so now the entire increase in minute volume has got to be achieved by increasing the rate. And here the respiratory rate became virtually 60. There's so much more that can be gleaned from a cardiopulmonary test, but for the moment we'll stop here. There are more videos to be made available, which will go into other things for you. And thanks for watching this. Please visit this site below in red for the many aspects of cardiopulmonary exercise testing, for the dates and the times for 3-day educational programs. Thank you.